All right. Hey, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. All right. I see you guys are joining already. Awesome. Well, I think we can start, right? So, yeah, welcome everyone to our webinar. My name is Aline. I'm from the Van Hack Premium, where I am responsible for technical interview practice classes. And I am super excited for the webinar today because, as I always say to our premium members, there's always room for improvement. So, even though I'm already instructor, I'm sure I have a lot to learn today, right? So, we do have Tom here. And yeah, would you like to introduce yourself? And then the stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Aline. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in this morning. My name is Tam. I'm the founder and CEO of CodeCast, which is a streaming platform for developer education. Prior to CodeCast, I founded and school here in Vancouver called CodeCore. Graduated 4 to 500 students, and throughout my experience at CodeCore, I've helped close to 400 people get jobs as junior developers in the Vancouver tech industry. So what I'll try in this presentation is to provide you some tips that may help you do better in your next technical interview. All right, so let's get started here. So what does an interview look like? So if you're applying for a job as a developer, whatever, whether it's junior, intermediate, or senior, the process roughly looks something like this. Usually you apply, and then there is a coding interview as a major piece of it. And then there's usually a behavioral interview, or what you might call a cultural fit. Again, this is a simplified process. In most companies, actually, it's a little bit more than that. There's usually screening at the beginning with the HR. There's sometimes initial, different types of coding interviews, and then the behavioral interview at the end to see if you fit with the team. But again, just for the purposes of this presentation, I'm gonna assume those kind of three major steps. Just keep it in mind that every company interviews a little bit differently. Today, I'll probably put more emphasis on the coding part. I will talk about the other ones as well, but I'll put more emphasis on the coding part because I think this is where I think I can give some helpful tips for you guys to do better on your next interview. So let's start by the first phase right here. So applying for jobs. I mean, this is where Van Hack I think can help you tremendously by sourcing the jobs and getting the suitable ones. There's probably Slack channels, online portals that you could look for stuff there. One advice I will give you there is, apply as many jobs as you can, right? Although sometimes you might look and you might see that I'm the perfect fit for this particular job, you don't know what's going on. Like they could fill it in from somebody else. There could be a lot more people applying for it. There could be somebody with even better skills. So you don't want to be dismayed by just applying for this one job. Now, I want you to take into account that the quality of the application matters a lot. I would highly avoid shotgunning what's called applications. What I mean by shotgunning applications is basically avoid just, I know some places you can just apply with one click. I would generally avoid doing this. Pick companies, and then what you should do more research about the company, write a customized cover letter for it, research about it, show them that you truly care about them, about working for them, and then you send in the application. As I mentioned, Van Hack would probably help you a lot with this. So this is why I won't spend as much time on it here. So again here, so it's that's why it's a little bit tough, and I remember just to be a little bit hard on our students because we tell them you have to build a quality application. You have to spend at least a couple hours for each application, at least an hour, just researching the company, writing a good cover letter. A good cover letter should be just to explain how much you care about the company and not just about your skills, because your resume tells your skills. The cover letter should be more about like what you found out about the company, why you're excited to work for them. So that takes time to draft a good cover letter. but it makes you stand out from all the other people who only sent their resumes. That's why, um, I tremendously encourage you to include a cover letter, and I also encourage you to pick the applications you apply to carefully. So balancing basically quality and quantity in here, because unfortunately you do need to send a quantity as well, as I mentioned earlier. Don't always find the perfect job, but when I do, it's been filled. That's usually what happens. Sometimes by the time you apply, they've already filled in the jobs for you. All right, so now let's talk about the coding interview. So coding interview, there's many different types of coding interview. There's whiteboard interviews, there's take-home exams. So there's pair with a developer and build a mockup. I'll explain what these things are because some of you may have encountered it, some of you may have not. Whiteboard interview, now with COVID time is probably all happening online, but before it used to be that you go walk into the room and there's literally a whiteboard and they'll give you a problem and they'll say, walk us through writing a solution on the whiteboard, meaning that you actually write code on the whiteboard. They don't expect the code to be functional, so they're really testing your general understanding and general knowledge about programming then. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So what's a take-home exam? I've seen a variety of ones. Sometimes they'll give you like a test on HackerRank or some kind of a tool where you could just log in and write your code. Sometimes they'll tell you to build a mini application where it'll be like, hey, we use React and Node or something, and then build a mini app using React and Node and show us how it works and explain why you made your choices and so on. Pair with a developer. This approach is, I like this approach because it kind of mimics real life where you spend an hour or two with a developer actually walking through the problem. There's more of a conversation over there and whatnot. And there's usually, you solve one, simple or difficult problems, usually sometimes multiple problems. And then they assess your skills there. Finally, build a mockup. Sometimes they'll give you a mockup like a wireframe or something, and they'll tell you, build a simple app that basically make that functional or mimics that as much as possible. That's more common if you're applying for like a hybrid designer developer role, or there is more of like a UI component of it, like a front-end developer. Again, there are many other types of interviews. It's not meant to be conclusive, but I think those are kind of the common ones that you're going to encounter when you're applying for companies. Every interview is different. That's one thing you should keep in mind. Like, you could prepare as much as possible, and then also prepare that every interview will be different. Every company will be different. That's why what I will do here, I'll provide you with some high-level principles that hopefully you can take to almost every interview. Because again, here, things in interviews would be very, very different. So principle one, treat interviewing like a skill that needs to be mastered. That's something that's usually very overlooked by developers. You will always focus on our as developers. I've been a developer for many, many years. We always focus on the technical skills, and we forget that interviewing is also a skill that we need to learn and master. It's not something we necessarily like, but if you need to land a good job, you really need to focus on interviewing itself as a distinct skill. Now, so this is an example for what I might call a full stack job hunter. Sorry, it's cut off here. It should be a job hunter. The idea is at the very bottom, you have your technical chops. Again, there is no interview techniques or gimmick that's gonna, avoid the fact that you really have to know your technical stuff. And this is why I'm like, I'm treating that as a given at the moment. To me, why I'm mentioning this is because sometimes you do have the technical chops, but still you don't get the job, mainly because you haven't mastered some of the other skills. Some of the other skills, again, this is not meant to be conclusive, but these are some of the things that I feel sometimes us developers fail in. One is presenting yourself. So how do you present yourself, for example? Well, you present yourself through your code. GitHub is a great way, for example, to showcase your code, what you do. This is a way to present yourself. LinkedIn is a way to present yourself. Show your previous experience, your skills, endorsements, etc., etc. Probably VanHacks have some portals where you could present yourself there as well. So any place where there is a touch point that you could do things to showcase you and showcase what you could do would be great. Any projects you've worked on in the past is a way to present yourself. That's very important, again, when you're hunting for a job, because when people are evaluating resumes, sometimes they dig deeper and they go check, where you are on the net, what you're doing, etc. So the better you present yourself, the more chances you will be in landing the interview and in doing better. Job hunting skills. How do you find the jobs? How do you apply for the jobs? Again, here, re-emphasizing the importance of doing things like researching the company and doing the cover letters and all that stuff. Pre-COVID, I would have emphasized networking. Maybe it's a little bit difficult these days to do networking, but there could be some like online forums or online meetings or something like this where you could network and meet other developers. Also, sites like Stack Overflow, when you answer questions and interact with people, there's a good way also to meet prospective employers as well. And finally, interviewing skills. You land the interview. Now, what do you do in the interview skills? I'll show some different techniques for the different types a bit later. But again, I want you just here as a principle to keep that interviewing is a skill and you can master it. You just need to put in the time and effort to do it. And again, even though you want to learn the next framework or the next coding technique, I think if you want to land a good job, dedicate enough time for learning the interview skills themselves. So principle number 2 is treat interviews as a conversation and not just a test. I mean, interviews are tests at the end of the day, right? And some of them, unfortunately, some of them will be pure tests. Some of them will send you like, solve it, we're not going to even talk to you, and then submit the code and it will automatically be graded, and then we'll let you in or not. So some of them are like this. Now, that said, when there is at least, these days online meeting or remote call, treat it more of a conversation. Even though they ask you the question, don't always assume that you cannot ask questions back or you cannot clarify or you cannot interact with them. Indeed, I say the opposite. The more you interact with them and you ask questions and you discuss solutions and stuff like this, you'll increase your odds of being accepted. Because in real life, that's what you do. You don't just, you're given a task, but you can ask questions. You could come up with solutions as a group, as a team. You could discuss back and forth with more experienced developers or developers who've been on the team for a while. So I'll do a small example later on where, like, what kind of questions you could ask. But keep it in mind, again, as a principle here, keep it in mind that when possible, of course, when possible, sometimes it's not, when possible, treat an interview as a conversation. People, want to hire people they enjoy working with. So the more you converse with them, the more they may get to know you better. Then the more they get to like you and want to work with you, right? So again, it's not finding a job as a developer or in a technical position is not just purely about doing the job. It's also how you interact with your coworkers. Principle number 3, and I guess something also generally overlooked, really know as much as possible about the company. Go to the interview prepared with as much knowledge about the company, technical or otherwise, as possible. Research about the company, and this gives you more ammo to basically discuss with them, to ask questions, to go back and forth, to have small talk before and after the presentation, to ask more intelligent questions. Again, don't just focus on the technology and just go there. Research the company, and I'll show you some techniques there, like blogs, Twitter, social media, etc., etc. There's a lot these days. Most companies put a lot of stuff out there that you could actually find a lot of information about them and what they do over there. Okay, so how do we apply some of these principles in real life? So I'll pick an example here for a whiteboard interview, because again, it tends to scare most developers. And honestly, again, it's not an approach that I necessarily agree with, because again, here, like, to me, it's not real life, right? Like whiteboard, I mean, you plan on whiteboard, but you don't really you don't really code on a whiteboard. You code on your computer, the access to internet. That said, this is something started, I think, by like Microsoft or some of the earlier big software companies to standardize kind of the testing process. And many developers, many companies still follow suit and still follow kind of this approach of coding. So this is why Again, many companies still do it. I don't think it's the best approach, but again, the fact that I don't think it's the best approach doesn't mean that you shouldn't be prepared for it and you shouldn't try it, because many companies can be really good companies and still follow this kind of, in my opinion, outdated approach for interviewing. Some of the other ones, like take a home test, build an app, pair with a developer, I think are much more effective. But again, I think to be ready for anything, just prepare that you may be given a whiteboard interview, and it's good to master the skill for it. Okay, so let's say you receive a question like this, and this is where I think, again, I'm going to use some of the principles I mentioned earlier. Like question, write a piece of code that find the most recurring letter in a string. That's probably more of like a junior to intermediate kind of an interview question you may receive. Likely, if you're applying for more senior positions, you may get a little bit more challenging one. Or in many cases, actually, this could be more like kind of a warm-up exercise. They give you like an easier kind of an exercise at the beginning, and then the difficulty kind of builds up. So I'll see. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so I'll start here. Again, I'm using my editor here, which is not really a whiteboard because simply I'm doing this remotely. In real life, you could be actually given like a literal whiteboard to do it. Then here you should, again, I would honestly, if I were you, I would start conversations right away. I was like, oh, this is great. I haven't encountered this question before. Let me try to think about it. So one very important thing here, which I will emphasize, is always verbalize your thinking process. Because what happens is developers don't know what you're thinking. The interviewers don't know what you're thinking. So if you want them to at least get a glimpse of your analytical thinking, analytical process, problem-solving skills, verbalize what you're thinking. First of all, you could even ask something like, hey, I'm going to use Ruby. Is that okay? If not, like, what other languages like JavaScript, etc. You could use like JavaScript, Java, Elixir, PHP, whatever. And then be like, okay, so I'm going to think here, what do I do? So let's say, I'm going to start maybe by having a string and then something like hello world. And then I'm like, okay, so I need to find the most recurring letter in this one. Notice how I'm verbalizing my thinking process here. It sounds mundane, but honestly, again, it makes the conversation more interactive. It makes it more lively. It makes it more likely that they'll basically talk to you and ask you questions. And again, know a little bit more about your thinking process. And then you can say something where, I need a way maybe to loop through every letter of the string. I need a way to keep track of how many times each letter occurred. So I want to keep track how many times H has occurred, how many times E has occurred, and so on. Finally, I need to know which one has occurred more. Is it the L? Is it the O? And so on. So I'm thinking here, maybe I could actually take this and find a way to iterate through each letter. If I were you also, I would ask the interviewer, hey, can I look up documentation? Sometimes they'll say yes, sometimes they'll say no. If they say yes, then you can simply, go to Google and look up something like, Ruby docs array, for instance. Most of, if you're especially doing remote interviews these days, some interviewers may accept it, that you may go and like look up just the documentation. Of course, they don't want you to go look up the whole solution. It just doesn't make sense. But then, in real life, you're not going to remember all these methods for any language or for any framework. So the more reasonable ones will tell you, yeah, sure, look up the documentations for Ruby strings, Ruby arrays, but only use the docs and don't use something else. So again, but this can only come if you ask a question. If you just assume that they're not going to allow you to do it, then again, you may just make it more difficult unnecessarily to yourself. So be like, okay, well, how do I go iterate through letters in a string? You can say, well, I can do something like here, each char view character, and then you can say something like puts character. And then here you could say, okay, let me run my application here. Great. So I'm, putting every character. Oh, I notice here there is a space. Do you want me to ignore the space or not? And then they'll tell you. If you ignore the space, well, you could do something here. If you're a Ruby developer, something here like replace gsub replace spaces with nothing, and then run the program again. And now, okay, we're omitting spaces right now. So again, this is here where, something like, even a simple question, like, do I ignore spaces? Do I do this? Just showing you that you're thinking here, that you're caring about what the customer wants, what your manager wants, your product manager wants, and so on. Then you can say, hey, well, I'm thinking out loud here, but I could use an array to track how many times each letter has occurred. So I could, but the problem is I have to know the index of every letter, so that could be a little bit tricky. I'm going to resort to using a key value storage, which is called a hash in Ruby. So maybe I'll call it something like frequencies, and I'll start a hash. And then what I'll do here, I will have to maybe look if I've already put the letter in, then instantiate it to 0. Otherwise, I will add 1 to it. So maybe I will put something like, if frequencies of the current character exists, then what you do, you say something like, frequencies for the current letter plus equals 1, incremented by 1. Otherwise, then what I will do, I will instantiate it to 1. So if I already put the character in, increment the occurrence of it by 1. If it didn't occur before, then instantiate it, start it at 1. And then here, what I will do, I'll print that hash at the end, the key value storage, run it. Oops, I made a mistake here. It says undefined method frequency. So clearly, I've frequencies. Oh, so instead of doing it as squares, I did it as a method, which shouldn't be the case. Oh, great. So now here I have a hash that shows me the frequency of each letter. Actually, I did notice here, and this is where, again, you're starting a question, you're starting an interview. And again, here you see me repeating this over and over, because really it's, again, just mastering the skill of, starting a conversation, talking back and forth with the interviewer. I notice here that H is a capital letter, while others are small letter. Do we treat the capital letters and lower letters differently? And then they'll tell you the answer. Let's say they say no. It's like, okay, no problem. So if we don't care, then maybe how about we just downcase all of them? If we downcase all of them and then run the program again, we notice that now they're all treated like lowercase. So great. So I'm like, okay, fine. So in this case here, what we will need is we need to go through this hash and see which one has occurred most. Clearly here in this case, it's an L. And then, so somehow we need to pick the L from the other ones. So what I'm going to do here, maybe I will keep track of the max number for occurrences. Let's say I'll start by 0. And the letter, the most recurring letter. I'll start it as nothing to start because we don't know yet. You know what I'll do next? I'll maybe loop through the hash. So I'll use each with Ruby, which takes a key and a value. And then I'll say here, if the frequencies of the letter, which is the value, sorry, the value is a number. So the frequencies of the key is greater than the max number, then what I will do, I will set the max number to become the current value, and then I will set the most recurring letter to be the current letter, which is the key. And then I'll say at the end, put the most recurring letter is the most recurring letter. Let's see if this works. Ruby, great. So it says the most recurring letter is L. So it seems like this solves it. But I think we could do a little bit better in here by maybe looking at some other solutions. And this is where I encourage you at the end. Also, you could form it in a kind of a question. You can say to the interviewer, he's like, hey, do you want me to improve the solution? This looks a little too long for what it's doing. I mean, if any of you are familiar with this question, in Ruby, you could do it in literally just one line, right? In interview, I think in most cases, they just want you to get to the solution, to see your thinking process. And this is where I emphasize asking questions, verbalize your thinking process, explain what you're doing, explain your decisions, and so on. So if they tell you, yep, sure, go ahead and improve the solution, or no, let's move on to another question or something, then this is where you interact. So you can say, hey, well, we can, find a better solution to doing this. We could find a better way to have a default value for hashes. There's probably a better method to find a maximum, and so on. And then you can slowly, again, verbalize your thinking process and do it. Oh, maybe I'll go to the slides and share them again. How can I reshare my slides? Sorry. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
There you go.
Sorry, I think it started from the beginning. So I'll just go to where I was. Yeah, so while it's going there, so again here, emphasizing, we are all wired when we're given a task to be like, okay, that's it. I'm just gonna go and do it now, right? But again, interview is more of a conversation. Again, in most cases, not always the case, but in most situations, always be like, ask questions, verbalize your thinking process. It's more important to most reasonable interviewers that they know that it's more important your analytical skills, your problem-solving skills, than knowing the exact answer. Because in the job, you're not going to know everything. You're going to come, you're going to get a new app, you're going to take you some time to learn it, and after a while, you'll get to be very productive in it. But early on, your analytical and problem-solving skills are a lot more important. And if you can show this by asking questions, interacting, verbalizing your thinking process, you increase your odds. Indeed, I'll tell you something, like a long time ago before I started CodeCore, I kind of followed this approach with the company, and I actually didn't even arrive to the final answer. I didn't get to a point where I showed a complete solution and still get an offer for the job. Because again, here, they know sometimes you're stressed out. They know sometimes you're nervous. You don't have all the resources, and you may not get to the final answer, but you could still get an offer because you've shown how much you know. You've shown your skills, your thinking process, and all that stuff. One tip I will give you here also. Let's say you didn't reach a final solution during the interview. As soon as possible after the interview, as I'm going to encourage you later to send a thank you note anyway to the interviewers. But part of it could be he's like, hey, I know I didn't come up with an answer. Here's I worked on it after the interview, and here's the solution. Again, here, like, some of them may accept it, some of them may not. But believe it, in some cases, I've heard from good developers of mine that it worked really well for them, because they show that you care about finding the best solution. You keep thinking about the problem even after the whole session is done, and I think it can increase your odds. And honestly, it might not cost you much time, like an hour or so after, to just come up with a better solution. Many of them would know you have more access to Google and solutions and stuff, but still, it doesn't hurt to. It's like, hey, for the most recurring letter, I figured out a way to do it in only one line in Ruby. Check my solution. I should have thought of this. I should have thought of that. I'm super excited to possibly join your company. Please, I look forward to hearing back from you, or something like this as a kind of a thank you note. But again, here, this is part of thinking outside the box here, and not just thinking of it as just like a simple structured test. Send a thank you note. Follow up with a better solution after the interview. Practice, practice, practice. Again, here, there's no shortage of this. Aline and the Van Hack team probably will help you tremendously with this. They're just, like I showed you with one. I mean, I've run through that example with students many times to be able to just go through it. In real life, like literally just put a whiteboard, pick a random test, and do it if you're unknown. We used to do a lot of kind of role playing where like students would be interviewers and others would be like the interviewees. I think it worked tremendously with our students in the past. Again, if you have more of an experienced person to kind of conduct an interview with you, again here, treat interview, again, back to the principle number one, is treat interview as a skill. It's something to master. It's not just about your technical knowledge, because we all have our own setup, our own kind of habits for how we code and stuff, but interviews will be very different. So the more you practice in these kind of little unknown environments, the better it will be for you. A couple of sites I like for practicing, codewars.com and hackerrank.com. They both have these kind of, problems like the one I showed earlier. Some of them are easier, some of them are a lot more difficult. So again, the more you're exposed to problems, you may even encounter the same one in the interview, but also it will expand you solving these type of problems. I mean, as you can tell, some of the problem with these type of questions is that they don't necessarily mimic real life. And this is why I think, sometimes you need to practice them specifically rather than practicing like, just learning the next framework and things like that. There's some good articles on freecodecamp.org about all the different types of interviews. Also highly encourage you to check, you can just go to Free Code Camp and write in the search something like coding interviews. You see different articles. Some of the things overlap with what I say. Some of things, specifically what to study for in this type of interview, that type of interview, how to behave in interviews, how to prepare for interviews and things like this. It's a great resource. They always put fresh articles as well. Highly encourage you to do it. If you want to go deep, especially if you want to interview at, like Google or Microsoft or these type of bigger companies, this is a great book called Cracking the Coding Interview. It goes a little bit deep, and some of them may be a little bit on the more challenging side of problems. But again, in some cases, like especially if you're applying, as I mentioned, for the Amazons or the Googles of the world, they ask more difficult questions. So again, the more you could expand the breadth of your knowledge, the more you'll be prepared to ace your coding interview. Take-home tests, as I mentioned earlier, I'll give you a few tips here. So this is when they give you an app or when they give you some kind of a problem and you have to take it home and solve it. Honestly, I think this is a lot more fair, a lot better. Again, here, some tips for it is ask questions. Don't treat it as soon as you receive it, that's it. Ask questions. Halfway through the implementation, you could even say, hey, I came up with these two solutions. If you're okay, like I'd love to ask you which one you prefer, or, this is my thinking around these two. Do you need me to handle this case or that case? Again, here, show them that you're interactive. You care about what they want, what the client want, what the customer want, or, in some cases, what the product manager want. And again, here, don't treat it as just a strict test. Ask questions, interact. I think it's going to help you tremendously. I would encourage you to write tests. That usually goes well with employers. What I mean by test is automated tests, whether they're unit tests or integration tests or whatever form of test you do it. I've noticed that goes a long way with most employers. Even with the employers who don't actually write tests, they will appreciate that you've added tests to your take-home exam. It shows you care about your craft as a software developer or as a technical person. You want to always improve, and testing is usually a good sign with it. Comments, sometimes the code, in most cases, I would actually discourage comments, because comments, usually the code should speak for itself. You shouldn't have to put a lot of comments to explain what your code is doing. But in some cases, to explain why you picked a particular approach over the other, actually a comment could help. So it may not mimic like a real life situation for writing comments, but you could say, hey, I picked this approach because of X, Y, Z. Again, here, back to verbalizing your thinking process, your analytical skills, your problem solving skills. And what this could help you with is, even if you get the suboptimal answer, you could still say, okay, well, he picked it because of this. In real life, maybe we would have discussed it and the person would have picked up another solution. Finally, a few bits about the culture fit. The most important thing is, again, here, research the company as much as possible. Unfortunately, every company will do the culture fit differently. Every company will assess it differently. The best way you could be prepared for this is, again, to research a company as much as possible. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. Research it before you apply, and research it before the interview, the technical interview, and even research them before the cultural fit interview. So how do you research a company? Well, I would always start with the company's website, learn what they're about us page, frequently asked questions, etc., etc. I would check their blog, technical or otherwise. It's good to be, by the way, familiar with their technology and technology stacks and choices and everything. And it's also good to know about their non-technical stuff. Like, did they win some award recently? Did they raise a big round of funding? Did they move to all remote these days or something like this? Like, the more you could learn and arm yourself about information about the company, the more likely you will be able to interact well with the cultural fit interview. Social media, again, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, you name it, you're going to see a lot of information there. Glassdoor, not familiar with the site. It's a site that basically previous employees talk about the company and what it's like to be working there. They rate it and all that stuff. It's a great way to research the company as well. Also, just Google the name of the company. So go to the company, Google their name. You might see a lot of news articles, a lot of opinions, a lot of feedback, and then it could help you out. And finally, previous employees, especially go to LinkedIn. Again, type in the name of the company. You may be surprised. A second or a third degree connection could be somebody who works at the company or previously worked at the company. You could ask them. You'd be surprised. For things like this, people are actually quite helpful and responsive on LinkedIn. So it certainly does, worth the try. So the more you could do of these, again, the more you increase your odds of getting into that company. A general rule of thumb I will give you is be prepared with at least 10 questions, because at the end of the interview, usually they'll ask you, do you have any questions for us? It's good to be prepared with a couple. What happens through the conversations before and after, some of them will be answered. So this is why I would say, prepare at least 10. So even if half of them are answered, at least you're left with 5 that you can ask maybe 1 or 2 of them to the company. But if you keep this in mind, at least it will push you to research a little bit more about the company, what they're doing, and their culture and all that stuff. Finally, send a follow-up. Thank you follow-up, right? I would send, if you have the emails of all the people who do the interview, I would send a follow-up thank you to all of them. Or if, just like an HR person contacted you, you can tell them, hey, please forward my thank you to all the people who interviewed me or something like this. For the technical part, as I mentioned earlier, if you thought of a better solution for the technical problems that they gave you, send them as part of the thank yous. Like, hey, thank you for taking the time to interview me. Hey, after this, I thought of this better solution. Here you go. And then I really look forward to the possibility of working with you guys. If you have any questions or you want to talk more, I'm available, right? Again, probably VanHack can give you some standard templates or give you some ideas for this. But again, always make a habit to send a thank you for anybody who took the time to interview you. Again, like everything I taught you today, not a single thing will is a silver bullet for you to kind of get the job. But if you stack all these things up together, I think it will increase your odds of landing the job and getting to work for that company. Yeah, that's it. What I have for now. Again, I hope some of these tips have been helpful for you guys. You could find me at CodeCast, codecast.io, Tam at codecast.io. You could find me on Twitter at Tamam, Tammam. Sorry, this M is going to the bottom right here. And yeah, at this point, I'm happy to answer any questions you guys may have.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Tam, for your presentation. Yeah, we just have some questions here in the chat, and I also have some questions for you.
Yeah, sure.
So we were talking about coding interviews. What about the TDD approach? Should we take that approach at some point or not?
Yeah, it's a very good question. TDD, for those of you who don't know it, is test-driven development. So it's basically writing the test before and then writing the code after. To be honest, this is like a point of contention in the, not contention, like I say, there's varying opinions in the coding community about the TDD approach. Some people are big proponents of TDD and they say TDD is the way to go. We all do TDD. Some others, me included, I'm not big followers of TDD per se. I like to have tests and testing and automated tests. I think they add tremendous value to the code. Just the TDD approach, I'm not fully in favor of it, mainly because I think by the time you finish the coding assignment, the code has changed a lot. So you end up throwing a lot of tests at the end of it. But again, that's not to mention some companies completely believe in it. So this is one of those things I would probably form it in a kind of a question by saying, hey, would you like me to do a TDD? Would you like me to write a test for this? Like for our coding example, I could have written some tests first and then started to slowly make things pass and like write a test, write things pass until I reached it. So the short answer, I would say maybe ask about it. And part of your research, if you see them blogging about being a big proponents of TDD, than just assume that they want TDD, right? If you like research a company and you see like their main developers say, hey, we're a big TDD shop or we like TDD, then I would do it. Otherwise, I would form it in a question. Because to me, honestly, if I'm interviewing people, it's less important to me, but I know for some other people it is important. For me, I like to see tests per se. I like to see like tests written, but not necessarily like like a written the test before the code.
All right, awesome. So yeah, asking questions is
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
enough, right? We can always ask
Yeah.
any questions. All right, another
Yeah,
question that I have for
exactly.
you is, what about
Mhm.
technical interview for other positions like DevOps, data analyst, data science? What can we expect?
Yeah, this is interesting ones. For DevOps, I mean, I think they may ask you to set up like I mean, again, the thing with DevOps, it's varying difference. They may either ask you to write like a Docker file, or they may ask you if you're using Terraform to produce like a Terraform files for a particular infrastructure, or they may ask you to just like write um, like like build an infrastructure or something like this. For data analytics, again, they may ask you to use like KN neighbor, nearest neighbor, or something like this algorithm. I would say I'm less familiar with those ones because we focus more on web development. I would envision, I mean, some of the principles I've covered may apply the same. Like if I was going to such interviews, I would expect there will be a coding part of it if coding is a part of it. Like I know DevOps is probably a big part of it is non-coding related, just understanding how a particular infrastructure or platform kind of is configurable and how to do things on it. But there will be a small coding component, and they may ask you to do it. But again, back to the principles. First, I would ask questions, back and forth when they're asking you to say set up an infrastructure. I'm picking DevOps as an example. I would verbalize my thinking process. I'd be like, well, I'm putting a load balancer here, and then I'm spinning off these three different types of servers, and I'm using this. As you verbalize your thinking process here, again, it shows your knowledge, it shows your things. So I would aim to follow those kind of same principles, but they will be applied a bit differently. And again, some of them may include a coding component, and if they do, then you could follow the other approach as well.
All right, awesome.
Mhm.
Thank you. All right, so questions from the chat. Do you think is it more important to prepare for solving algorithms problems than prepare for building design patterns?
um, well, I mean, say like it's a very good question. If I was interviewing people, I care more about design patterns myself, right? So when I interview people, I like to see them applying some real life design patterns, because design patterns, you actually use them almost every day. The algorithmic problems, you use them very occasionally, if at all. So again, but the problem is my opinion doesn't matter. It matters what the company wants. That's why I would encourage people to practice both. Like unfortunately, like the thing is with design patterns, you get to use them. So you're actually in your day-to-day coding, you're using them. So you may need to study them less, more like practice them in your coding, in your day-to-day coding. But for the actual algorithmic problems, again, as a web developer, mobile developer, you don't encounter them as much, even as a DevOps developer or something. But so you need to practice those a little bit more. So that's why I probably put more emphasis on practicing those. Um, yeah, like and because I think they you don't encounter them as much, so you probably less practice of them. I know even like if I do an interview now, I probably need to practice again those algorithmic questions, unfortunately, because day to day I code, I use design patterns, I use frameworks, I use libraries, which is not really what many of them test you for.
All right, great. So another question is about what if I don't remember exact the syntax of the language or any methods, how to handle it in the interview if I cannot have
Yeah,
access to the documentation?
that's a fantastic question, and it happens a lot to everybody. I mean, you code every day and you don't remember the things, so you refer to your previous code. Again, here I'll form it first in terms of a question: can I look up documentation? If they say, yep, you can look up documentation, I would go and get the exact number. If you can, then just make up a name. Say, let's say, for example, the one I showed you is each character. And then let's say I didn't remember what the name of that method is. It'd be like, I remember there was a method in Ruby that basically loops through every character. I don't exactly, this is exactly what I would say in an interview. I don't remember the exact spelling of it. So maybe I would use each character fully spelled, which is wrong. It will not do it. But say, hey, each character, and this is where verbalizing is important. You say, each character, I assume this will loop through every character of the string. So this way here, you basically, show them that you actually thinking about it. There is a method that does it. You just don't remember the syntax. Every reasonable developer will accept this, because think about it. Like in real life, you have Google, you have your previous code, you have your, you have all the resources. You could even ask about it in a chat room or Slack. So in real life, it's more important to know that something like this exists, the principle behind it, which is looping, using arrays, using hashes, etc. It's more important knowing those than actually knowing the exact syntax. So I would say here again, ask questions. Number one. Number two, if they don't allow you to to actually look up the documentation, just make up a method on the fly, and they may actually tell you, hey, just write anything for now, and then and move on.
All right. And yeah, I just thought about another question. Like, let's say the interviewer gives a problem and I realize that I have done something similar and I have it on my GitHub, for example. Is it a good practice to mention or to ask if I can go to that, use that in the solution?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Indeed, this could be a good segue for them to kind of look at your GitHub and check what you've done before, check your profile. This is again back to presenting yourself. I think GitHub is very important. Somebody's asking here in the room, will an inactive GitHub profile hamper my chances of getting an interview? I mean, again, it's a bit. I'm segueing here a little bit, diverting a little bit, but just I want to emphasize GitHub is very important. GitHub can behave like your resume. So I understand sometimes, like if you look at my GitHub, there's not a lot of public stuff, but because I code on GitHub, then you could see that there's activity on my GitHub. The GitHub will show you there's like little block of code, and there's little green dots to show your activity. At least if they see there's activity there, they know you're coding privately, at least, right? But if they don't see anything, then they'd be like, yeah, is this person even active coding? Has he been off coding for a number of months or something like this, which could be a red flag for some employers. So back to your original question, yeah, I would absolutely ask it as part of the conversation. Can I refer to my GitHub? And especially if you have GitHub that is good and presentable, because then they'll go to GitHub, they'll see you're active, they'll see you're contributing to open source, they'll see you're doing this or that, and then I think it will increase your chances for sure.
All right, awesome. And another question that I would like to ask you is, how important is my communication skills during the interview? What if, for example, I cannot remember a word, but I know what I want to explain? How is it going to affect the interview itself?
I think communication for developers is important for sure, because you don't want, like, again, if it's like a super smart developer, but she understands or he understands the problem not in a right way, they'll end up writing a perfectly good code that just solves the different types of problems. So this is why communicating is important, and that's in big part why I emphasize asking questions and turning the interview like a conversation. If you don't remember a certain word or certain expression, or if English is your second language and you don't know how to say a particular thing, I think that's completely fine as a developer, because it's most important to understand and come up with a solution. So that's as much as communication goes. If you were applying for like a social media or for like a blogging or business type of a position, I think you have to have a perfect English per se if you're applying for an English speaking company. But for a technical company, I see people whose English is imperfect all the time, but they're just excellent developers, and that happens tremendously. So if you don't know a word, I will try to explain your way around it, like try to explain what you want or what you mean or what you intend to do. And then they'll actually, again, help you out. This is where it's a conversation. They'll be like, oh, do you mean X? And then they'll be like, oh, yeah, I meant X. So then you can continue from there. So if you treat it like a conversation, you don't have to know the perfect word. And as I mentioned, you have to know good enough English, but your English doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. Again, I see it here in Vancouver all the time. Companies employ people who are originally, Brazilian, Indian, Chinese, European, Arabs, whatever, and some of them speak, again, heavy English, I should say, like heavy accent, or sometimes they make a lot of grammatical mistakes. But luckily, those things get fixed into the code, so it is important. I cannot, deny that, if two people, one has better communication skills, I may favor that person. I mean, it may be like a little thing that tips the scale a little bit, but I don't think it's a make or break if your coding skills, if your technical skills are good.
All right. Yeah. Code itself doesn't have an accent, right?
It doesn't have a language, it's pure logic. It doesn't have an accent. Your code, that's why, again, your code speaks for you. If you have a good GitHub that have good code, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So another question here from the chat. What could be the questions that employers would ask to verify if we really worked on projects that we mentioned in our previous experiences? So how could they assess that?
How could they assess it? Usually, if this is why it's important to put it on GitHub. If you put it on GitHub, you could actually click on commits, and you could see the commits that person has done. So I could go for a particular, because I know in our school, our students used to do group projects, and everybody would present that project as part of it. But if you go on GitHub, I could go to the commit history, and I can see what each student has done. And I think, if the project you worked on is an open source, then no problem. They'll go and they see your name and all the things that you've done. If it's not an open source, usually they'll ask you. They'll be like, what did you do on that project? Because they know, I mean, for most, especially if you worked on like a private big project, you're not gonna, it's not possible that you've done everything, unless it's a very small company. So if it's a big company, they'd be like, okay, what part did you do? You can say, well, I did the React part, I did the backend, I did the front end, I did the database, I did, this or that. And then this is where, again, it becomes part of the conversation. Again, I focus more today on the coding interview part, but the whole interview usually involves sometimes going through your resume, asking you about your previous experiences, asking you about your previous projects, explaining about, what you like, do you have side projects and that kind of things before they give you the technical. So that usually comes from there, and they'll ask you about it. But if possible at all, if it's at all possible to make your code public, I highly encourage you to do so. Just put it on GitHub. You'd be surprised how important it is, because again, it's hard to fake that you've written good code, right? Like if you've copied code, I mean, you could only do it for a while. At some point, you have to write your own genuine original code, and that will show on your GitHub. So it's an excellent way for developers to assess you.
All right, awesome. One last question would be, what about time management while coding in the interview? What if I cannot get to a solution in a given period of time? I mean, will I fail because of that? How can we handle?
Yeah, excellent question as well. Honestly, this one really depends on the company. I mean, I've been through both cases, honestly. I've been in situations where I didn't arrive to the final answer and I get an offer from the company, and cases where I didn't arrive to the answer and I didn't get an offer from the company, right? So I would say here, if it is a whiteboard kind of an interview and you've been verbalizing your thinking process, then you still have at least some chance because they've seen your analytical skills. If you've been silent the whole interview and you didn't arrive to the question, your odds are much lower of getting an offer if you didn't arrive to the question. So I would say here, re-emphasizing just verbalizing your thinking process and stuff, because it increases your odds. If the time is ends, and I would say like there's a minute left or so, I would be like, hey, if I had enough time, I would have tried these things. I would have experimented with these things, right? That could go a long way. Again, it's just, back to verbalizing the thinking process, and turning it like an interview more into a conversation. But if you say this at the end, then at least, again, you don't know who you're competing against. Some other interviewee could get the perfect answer, have great communication skills, they'll get the job. So you don't know for sure, but you could be basically the best out of who they interviewed. The fact that you got very close and you've shown that you would have tried those things, haven't given enough time, then it will increase your odds. No guarantees there, but it will increase your odds of getting the job there.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're
Do we
welcome.
have time for one last question,
Oh,
or
absolutely, no problem.
do you see the questions in the chat? Is there
Yeah, I
any?
see there's many good questions here.
Yeah.
So for example, here, most projects I've done not open source, NDAs, put them on GitHub. Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky one, especially if you use VSTS or some other kind of things. I would say in situations like this, try to put it on your resume as much as possible, and explain why you do it. Um, and yeah, like if you're able to include snippets of the code, that would be great. I've seen some people do this before, where you can say on your resume, hey, I have some private code, I can share snippets of it later, just so you can assess my code quality. But many employers understand, if you have a job, you cannot disclose the code. So certainly I would never disclose a code for a company you worked at. So mention this there. And also, generally speaking, again, this is kind of bit of a tangent, but I would always encourage you to have a side project. Like, no matter what kind of a job you have, to be a good developer, I mean, even when I'm extremely busy as a developer, I always try to have a side project that's very different from what I'm doing in my day job. It really helps propel you and pushes you in different directions. If you're doing, say, Java in your day job, maybe pick a React project on the side or something like this, or something you're interested in. Maybe you're more interested in digging deeper into databases, so you pick a side project that's heavy on database. And when you have a side project, you can say, hey, I have this side project that's public on GitHub, and my main code is on VSTS or whatever private repo you're using, and then this will help you at least showcase your skills. Data structure is mandatory for developers in interviews. I'd say for almost, yeah, I would say the short answer is yes. Data structures are very important. Now, how far you go with data structures, this is where it's a little bit unknown depending on the company. Companies like, for example, Amazon, Google, or something, they will go deep into data structures, into things like trees, red-black trees, and some like data structures you may not use day to day. But the basic data structures, such as arrays, hashes, hash maps, that kind of things, those are very important because you do end up using them day to day as the developer. For the whiteboard, what if you carry out a UML class responsibility? Well, if that's the role you're applying for, then that makes sense. But in most cases, they actually want you to write code. They actually want you to take a stab at actually writing down a working solution on the whiteboard. But again, here, this is where I would form it into a question. Hey, would you like me to put a UML, or would you like me to come up with the right code? And I think most cases, they'll tell you to write code on the whiteboard and not just a UML diagram.
All right. Awesome.
Okay, cool. I'm not sure if there's any other questions. You let me know. I'm just looking at the top of the list for now.
All right. Well, I think that's all for now, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you so much for all the content. It was very great. I really enjoyed it. For those who are joining us, thank you for joining us as well. Just a quick reminder, you will receive on your email a coupon code for our VanHack Premium subscription. As I mentioned, I am the technical instructor there. So, and it's very funny because you mentioned hash maps and stuff, and we just saw it yesterday in the class. So yeah, we've been practicing some live coding as well, and so on. So yeah, thank you everyone for being with us, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Aline. And yeah, I just shared on this channel. Email me Tam at codecast.io. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, or hit me up on LinkedIn or Twitter. And wish you the best of luck, you guys. This is a great time to be a developer, and keep up the good work, and I hope you achieve your goals.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Bye
Take care.
bye.
Bye.